been diving deep into leadership and your experience in the morning. Now it's time for us to look outside and learn from others and bring their expertise into the work that we do together going forward. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to you guys. Thank you so much.
Afternoon, everybody. Hi, hi, hi. It's great to be here. My favorite place to be among smart, brilliant, wonderful college students, and especially CUNY students. I'm sorry, I'm biased. I love you, NYU, but I'm biased. I'm thrilled to run into two students, actually, who will be part of the Prison to College Pipeline program that I run at John Jay. So special shout to the two students who'll be part of the students visiting prisons with me next year. You can feel free to chat to them about this amazing experience. So we have an awesome panel here today, a lot of wisdom up here, and I'm looking forward to hearing their thoughts. I do so much work around mass incarceration that I rarely have the pleasure actually of being able to talk about the other side of the wall, so to speak, and the policing issue, which is what we're going to focus on today and really get into the nitty-gritty of how these amazing people do their work and how they envision their work going forward, and what are the qualities that are necessary to do their work really well. So we have all the way over to my left, Ghita Schwarz, who is Senior Staff Attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights. Welcome, Ghita. Next to her is Nonny Onkeyweli, Legal Fellow at Policing Project at NYU Law, who will be talking especially about the work in Cleveland, the Cleveland Federal Monitoring Team. And right next to me here is the wonderful Corey Green, co-founder of H.O.L.L.A. As you can see, he never comes without gear, so which stands for How Our Lives Link All Together. Corey's a formerly incarcerated community organizer who does wonderful work in the community. So welcome, all three of you. Thank you for being here. So I thought I would start with one question for all of you, which is if you could talk a little bit about the work that you do in layman's terms. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How you came to do it? What was your path into this work? And then I wanted to throw out I'm big on radical reimaginings and really trying to understand things sort of from the ground up. So how do you define the word policing? So tell us about your work, how you came to do it, and then what's your definition of policing? So Ghita, we'll start with you.
And I think we were told thumb distance. My name is Ghita. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights, which is a 50-year-old civil rights organization. We do international human rights. We represent many people detained in Guantanamo, and we also do what's traditionally thought of as domestic civil rights litigation. Including the stop and frisk litigation. Our team led the litigation against the NYPD's stop and frisk practices that were such a prevalent part of the Bloomberg administration, and we now are part of the team working on the remedial process in the wake of the successful lawsuit to make sure that the policing reforms that the community wants has a chance of being taken into account. What I do is a part of policing that I think people don't traditionally think of as policing, which is immigrants' rights. I do a range of other stuff, but immigration is the fastest, immigration detention is the fastest growing component of mass incarceration. In 2015, 49% of all federal prosecutions and convictions were for immigration crimes like illegal entry or re-entry after deportation. And it's really an enormous part of American policing, even though it's mostly, though not entirely, done at the federal level. So a lot of what we do as litigators in our organization, the way we do civil rights litigation, is working with community groups and partnering with them. We we don't always succeed, but we try very hard to make sure that the kind of legal work we're doing doesn't put the litigator front and center. We're not supposed to be making the main strategic choices about what our client wants, but rather working with community partners, our plaintiffs, many of whom come from community organizations we work with, to make sure that community goals, organizing goals, and movement goals are centered in the litigation. We don't always succeed, but it is our aspiration and our goal, and I think that is where the best kind of change comes. Litigation is an extremely slow process. It takes years and years and years, and it simply can't be the center of a movement to bring social change. So that's what we do. I'm sorry, I forgot the third part of your question, Beth.
How did you come to
Mhm.
this work? And then the last question was about how do you define policing?
Well, I have been a lawyer for a long time. I'm pretty sure I've been a lawyer for less than anyone in the room has been alive, but still quite a bit of time. I started off doing direct legal services, doing education law in immigrant communities. I started so long ago that the phrase school to prison pipeline was but a fluttering meme and hadn't, in fact, I don't think the word meme even existed. And now, people are very, very aware of what it means to have a student disciplined, and how that can lead to a lifetime of contact with police and with the prison system. And from there, I did immigration representation work at a youth services center called The Door, and then I moved into civil rights litigation at an organization that's now called Latino Justice, but used to be called Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, and then to CCR. My personal connection to a lot of this work is my parents were immigrants. They were from Poland, pre-war. They're Jewish. They suffered enormously during World War II and are, what we now call today Holocaust survivors. And it's probably seems strange now to learn this, but in the years immediately following the war, there was an enormous amount of anti-immigrant rhetoric and policy to prevent the undesirables mostly from Eastern Europe, mostly Jewish, from entering the United States. For many of the identical reasons that we hear now, they are lazy and are going to suck at the government trough. I guess that's a mixed metaphor. And also, contradictorily, they're going to take all our jobs. And today we do not think of that group of immigrants as, an undesirable part of, when I say we, I mean the powers that currently be. It's just not assumed that Eastern European Jewish immigrants were part of the undesirable immigration that we so often hear about now. And so I think it's worth thinking about, the constant that we have in the United States. We think of ourselves as a nation of immigrants, but actually we're also, at the same time, a nation of very strong anti-immigrant feeling and waves. And this is something that stays consistent in our history, even as the group that many reactive forces are targeting changes. Policing. Well, policing to me does not mean a member of the New York Police Department. It's not exclusive to that. Obviously, most people, their contact with the police, with the policing system, is through their local police force. But policing is really such a much larger part of our society. It's not just the NYPD. It's not just the federal immigration forces. It's the security officers who are in our schools. It's really it's the people who are checking our luggage at the airport. It's such an enormously broad part of our existence here in the United States. It infiltrates every single part of community life. And I think that makes the United States somewhat unique among so-called democracies, that really so many aspects of our life have the potential to be surveilled, frequently on racial bases, frequently, for targeting minorities. And it doesn't just start with the local police officer, and it doesn't end with the local police officer. It's really a whole array of a system that covers many, many aspects of our life.
Hi, my name is Nonny, and I work for the NYU Policing Project. And the Policing Project's main mission is front-end accountability to policing. So most policing that we see in our country has back-end accountability. Judicial review, which is when cases go to court. Inspector generals who look over misconduct. So it's all things where you look after the fact and look for what went wrong. But the policing project focuses on front-end accountability, and we have a few principles. One thing is to have clear rules before an incident occurs. So, as many of you know, there's many stories. There's one news story where an off-duty officer pulled somebody over on a highway, and ended up being an officer-involved shooting. And then it came out that there wasn't actually a rule about how off-duty officers interact with when they pull people over. So we focus on rules before the fact, and those rules should be public, so anybody can see them later for transparency reasons and accountability. And our last principle is public input on those rules, so community members have a voice in those actual rules that govern them. And like I said, back-end accountability is great, but as we've seen, it's never really worked, but it's been made really clear in the past 3 or 4 years, it really doesn't work, or it can work, but we need to have rules ahead of time that keep things from happening, so we're not fixing things after the fact. So the policing project, we do this in 4 main ways. One way is helping to write rules ahead of time for police departments, for boards who want to have best practices published. We also do community engagement, which works to improve transparency, and that's where I focus my work on. And the third thing we focus on is cost-benefit analysis. In most parts of society, there's some kind of analysis to see if something is worth it. It's why all these apps are started. Would you rather go pick your food up yourself, or would you rather have it delivered? And you balance it out and you choose what makes the most sense. In policing, that doesn't happen at all. We don't have a sense of how much it costs to have more officers on West 4th Street versus another street. We have no idea what the social costs are for stopping and frisking people in particular neighborhoods. And we also look at metrics in a very strange way. We look at the number of arrests, and we look at the number of things that you're not really quite sure if that's the only way you should be measuring things. So that's our third bucket, cost-benefit analysis. And our last bucket is litigation. We haven't done a lot of that because we've been focusing more on community engagement, which I'll go into. So our community engagement work happens in several different ways. One way is through police chiefs asking us to come in. So we did that in Camden, New Jersey. They were starting a new body-worn camera policy, and they wanted to have community input on that. We went in and found a way to get community input, which everyone's trying to figure out right now. We did online surveys, we held community forums, we reached out to community groups, and then we eventually created a report taking all that data and gave it to the police department, and then they drafted their policy. We also work with community groups, like in Chicago, we just were asked to come in there to work with GAPA, which is Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability. And that's a group of many different community groups who are trying to have police accountability in Chicago. And then in Cleveland, what I do, we work with the federal monitor. In Cleveland, there's a federal consent decree. So I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's in the news a lot these days. But the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, has the ability to sue police departments in cities who consistently violate constitutional rights. So in Cleveland, that occurred close to the Tamir Rice shooting, which is the young boy with the BB gun who was shot. And the DOJ went in and they found that, wow, this happens all the time. This is a constant thing, and there is the rights of the individuals in Cleveland are continuously violated. And so the DOJ has the power to sue Cleveland, which they did, and they came up with an agreement. And with that agreement, both the parties, the city of Cleveland and the DOJ, pick a monitor. And so I work with the monitor, and we focus on getting the community voice to all these new policies that have to be revised in Cleveland. So they recently had to redo their entire use of force policy. And with that, we did like a three or 4 week engagement process where we asked people what they wanted this policy to look like. Many people had concerns about the mentally ill, how to interact with young people, what to do with people who don't speak English, and de-escalation, and the different ways that you can de-escalate. So we're doing communication in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different capacities. So I'll move on to the next question, which was what brought me here. So I graduated law school last May, and during law school, I was very surprised as I learned that the Constitution never applies in the criminal context. So you don't have, I mean, I'm not surprised, but you know when it's spelled out for you very clearly in your classes, you're like taking common law, and we have all these rights, taking criminal procedure, and those rights disappear if you are a criminal, and you might not even be a criminal, whatever that means. So I got really interested in that space, and at the same time, the policing project was just starting, and so I was doing an externship there, working specifically in Camden, helping bring community feedback to this body-worn camera policy. And at that time, the Cleveland Federal Monitor asked us to work with them, and I began working with them. And eventually, I decided to do this for a year. I was given the opportunity to serve as a fellow through the law school. So that was kind of what brought me here. And then my definition of policing. So, I mean, I think overall our country should have a radical reimagination of what policing should look like. I don't know if it should be called policing, maybe public safety. But to me, I will focus on local police. That's what I deal with mostly. But Ghita was right. Policing spans from, walking past a dog or a bomb-sniffing dog who's just sniffing for bombs to, immigration and TSA. But I'll focus on local policing because that's how most of us interact with police. And in my opinion, policing should be the community and public safety officers working together to solve the problems that the community wants to solve. So, sometimes in some neighborhoods, police are solving problems that the community doesn't really care about, or they do care about them, but it's not even actually being solved. Scott Thompson, the police chief of Camden, one of the reasons he brought us in was because a 4-year-old girl was shot in not maybe necessarily over police, but a low-income community in Camden. And it was pretty clear that somebody knew who shot her, but nobody came forward. Nobody wanted to talk about it. So this 4-year-old girl is dead. Everybody's very sad. And, not that you should we probably should arrest that person according to our definition of policing, but there's somebody out there who's using a gun in a violent way, carelessly, and killed a 4-year-old. And nobody wanted to talk about it. So, we have to figure out a way to build trust between the community and police so that people actually solve the problems that they want to have solved. So that is kind of my interpretation of policing, the community finding the problems that they want solved and working with the police, with public safety officers to solve those problems in the way that makes the most sense to them. Corey?
Yo, peace. What's up? My name is Corey Green. Shout out to Rachna, one of the Hill and Justice organizers in the building, who come through and practice leadership by showing up. And I just want to throw out a quick thing about language because we're going to probably get into a conversation. And just as a formerly incarcerated person, just understanding how criminalization and criminal justice system, or what we call the criminal punishment system, or what some people call a new iteration of chattel slavery, part of the way it functions and one of the ways it works is so entrenched in our global DNA and emotional responses that we walk with a everyday emotional baggage of dehumanization, which is why it's easy for some of us to throw some people in a cage and feel okay with it and still go to work and still be okay. And one of the ways that's perpetuated is through language. Criminals, convicts, predators, super predators, thugs, So I'm just gonna, throw some energy into the space and ask us to be conscious and think about language and how we like carry that with us every day, to like humanize ourselves and other folks. And I come to this work. H.O.L.L.A was started while I was serving time in prison, and I was serving an 8-year sentence, and me and some brothers met like 3 years into my sentence, and we was all on our own personal journey of transformation. And through our own journeys and the conversations we was having with ourselves, we came to many conversations with each other. And those were the early ideas of what H.O.L.L.A, how our lives link all together. And that's also another way how I come to this work too, thinking about my mom's, who was impacted by the crack epidemic in the 80s, and who was born in Jackson, Mississippi in the 40s, and come from a lineage that was on plantations in the Delta. And she moved through the migration and through the upward north mobility towards freedom, and went to Chicago and held it down with our aunts over there, and then worked her way back to New York. And that happened in about the 80s, and she had me, and then crack flooded our neighborhoods, and she became a victim of that. And I say all this to say that, like, for us, we're trying to breathe. So doing this work is about us breathing. It's about like trying to stop a system that's been working constantly. The reason why we having this conversation in 2017 is because the system is still working. That's the only reason why we having a panel talking about what does engaging communities look like to transform policing. In 2017, we're still having this conversation. On my way here, I was listening to Malcolm X, Ballad of the Bullet, and this was in the 60s, and he was saying something about the government has failed us. He said, if we still singing, we shall overcome in the streets marching, that's a clear example that the government has failed us. And that was in the 60s. And then the work that like we're trying to do and that we're cultivating at H.O.L.L.A, comes from an understanding that we've been in a very precarious situation in this country for a long time, and that the institutions from policing to healthcare to education, because before the school to prison pipeline was named the school to prison pipeline in 1997, I left in handcuffs, and I was never ever back into New York City public school. I was shipped away in handcuffs, and I went to a courtroom that told me I can't go back to school. I need to go to a GED program. And we begin to not trust these systems. We begin and we carry the wounds, my mom's wounds. I see my mom's. We done went to welfare services. We done sat on those dirty, dingy building floors week after week. So what H.O.L.L.A is doing is saying that, like, our young people who are tossed away, who are not sought or seen as human by the structures, we need a space to heal and build. And even when we get access to these structures, like me, I graduated from NYU, like our experience here are still mad violent. We're still dehumanized. Like my full blackness is never accepted. Like my full hoodness is never accepted. And I got to figure out how to be NYU, and leave my block at home, and leave my mom's story at home, and leave all that history at home. So even when we do get access to these things, it does a different kind of violence to us. So we created a space in H.O.L.L.A where we Rush Nigga talk more about this, where we created a movement called Healing Justice, and we're really thinking about, like, we need to stop the school to prison pipeline. We need to abolish the box that are asking about criminal convictions in college universities. But we've been impacted and infected by these systems for so long that we also have to do the work and heal internally from the ways these things have internalized our bodies, the way they have to disrupt relationships between me and my mother through those many moments that she was dealing with, and I was dealing with what I was dealing with. And that until we can really, like, cultivate deep love and and like I said before about the global emotional dehumanization that the criminalization does to us. So we think we're criminals. Like, man, many years when I was 19, 18, and police was running on me every day, I thought I was a criminal. Like, I owned it. Like, I knew why they was coming to me. I knew when they told me to like jump over. Like, I'm like, yeah, like this is okay. That was an okay dynamic. And like today, like through my own process, like I understand that I'm not a criminal no more. But that's a lot of work that I did. That shit didn't happen overnight. That wasn't like watching a documentary. That wasn't like reading a book. Like to wake up and understand that I'm not a criminal. Like I had to work hard personally, like night and day, and fight and argue and put myself in situations to challenge myself, to rework through that. And that's a deeper kind of work that is undergirding what H.O.L.L.A is doing, the deep self transformation as we do the external transformation as well. And then policing. I think of slavery. I think of colonization. I think of institutionalized violence. Like I said before, I think of an entrenched system of dehumanization, of killing humanists. And I think about deep wounds that live in my home still. That like you can't see even when the policy changed, when Rikers is closed, like the wounds is still there. I still spent 27 months on Rikers. Like you can close Rikers, like most of my blocks still spend mad time on Rikers. Who's coming to do community healing to us? Who's helping us work through like all of the stuff that we experienced in Rikers when Rikers is gone, right? So the criminalization is deeply about dehumanization. And the last thing, it's like the reform work around policing is really surface, and it doesn't get at the rehumanizing. And I can get more into that. I kind of got into it already, but I get more into that later. I don't know if policing that's not even like a vocabulary that I'm playing with or idea that I'm playing with. I'm thinking that part of indigenous practices, part of like old traditions, part of grassrootness is like really spiritually and faithfully believing in something that is not what this is, and something, and then also like as a and tapping into like like we got many like the center H.O.L.L.A, we got many practices that we're doing now that we can really go into. But policing as a construct of like jail bars, court systems, cops on the street, handcuffs, white and blue cars riding down the street, detectives fronting like they're your friend and they put on a badge, like immigration popping out, knocking at your door. Policing in that sense, like that never ever brings safety to me. That never means global safety. That never means stopping crime. That never means rehumanization. Like I never in my whole life, in my experiences with policing, from Mississippi to New York to Chicago to upstate New York when I was in prison to Rikers Island, like I can like millions of moments with police, and like 99% of them have been violent. My mom's leaving in handcuffs, me leaving in handcuffs, children's crying because somebody leaving in handcuffs. Like I don't know an experience when police like they don't work like so. And I think people need to come to these neighborhoods and come to and build with folks who see police in this way, who live police in this way, because I think, and it's the same thing with like throwing people in their cell. Like before I went to prison, I remember like my block is like one of those $1 million blocks where it feeds the jail system. So I seen when you're 15, you just you go outside, you start doing what you have to do to survive, and then you go. And then the next group who's 12, they get like it just keeps going. So I see older folks on my block just go to jail, go to jail, go to jail. I lost the point.
You had the point. No, you had it the whole time. So, question, everyone's sort of talked about coalition building, and that's a central part of what you do, all of you. So can you reflect a little bit about the nitty gritty of coalition building? What does that mean? How do you engage communities? Are there do's and don'ts of ways to engage communities around these issues? And then also, I think it's impossible not to ask how this work is impacted by the current administration, especially you, Ghita, reading just today about what is the percentage of deportations happening and so on and so forth. So how is your work, or is it not impacted by the current federal administration.
I thought maybe Nonny would have something to say about the possibility of getting consent decrees under this administration, because I think it's very, very different. Like I think every other civil rights organization that we knew, we came to work on November 9th astonished, just shocked. And I think, at least in the civil rights legal community, most people were very unprepared for what happened on Election Day. And it has been, although now what we see in the news is, all these sort of scandals and investigations around the Trump administration, the reality is the Trump administration has been doing an enormous amount of work on multiple fronts all at once to ramp up oppression, including through policing. There's a lot of attention to the kinds of things they're doing through immigration, but of course, very recently, I think it was this week, the Attorney General Sessions said he was going to start reversing some of the guidance to federal prosecutors about seeking lower sentences for lower level crimes. He doesn't believe in that. And definitely on the immigration front, there is a constant onslaught of criminalizing activity. It's really a pretty recent phenomenon that immigration is even thought of as a criminal concept. And I think what Corey said is exactly right. This language that we now use to refer to people who are immigrants is, it in and of itself creates this very anti-immigrant policy and agreement with the policy. It's really very, very new that you can be prosecuted for entering the country illegally or re-entering the country after deportation. It's, just the last, I think, 40 or 50 years, and it's only very, very recently that that the prosecutions have increased so dramatically. And from our point of view, there are a lot of reasons for that, and we have to fight all those reasons on multiple fronts. We now have a very involved private prison system and an even greater private immigration detention system. And when you have private, for-profit prison and detention companies, you have to fill those facilities because otherwise they won't make money. And then their shareholders won't gain money on stocks. So the priority, for, I think in particular this administration, but they're certainly not the first, the Obama administration, expanded detention and expanded deportation extremely significantly compared even to George Bush. We're fighting not only with the Trump administration's use of the law and new initiatives to clamp down on immigrants, but also the profit motive, which requires an enormous influx of resources to expand policing, to expand immigration policing, to ask for more, for higher sentencing, to avoid the kind of, I'm sure not always really that collaborative role that the DOJ takes, but in aspiration, this collaborative role that the DOJ might come into a community and help that community resolve some of its policing issues. So what we're seeing is not just challenges that we can fight in court, but also economic challenges that are actually much harder for litigators to figure out a way to work. And that's part of the reason that we work so closely with community groups and try to have the law as one of many tools that communities and movements can use rather than the main event. It's just not a very efficient way to fight some of these things.
And can you talk a little specifically about the community groups that you work with and how those partnerships look?
I think first I'll talk just a little bit about our stop and frisk litigation, which I was not a member of that team, but that litigation, which was this class action case that was filed in 2007, but really began in an earlier case several years before, was brought in. The plaintiffs were individuals, but many of them became plaintiffs because of their involvement in community groups like Communities United for Police Reform in New York, Malcolm X grassroots leadership also, and just a variety of different groups in New York who had been fighting for a long time, calling attention to the problems in stop and frisk, and wanted to be involved in a dramatic way to change the policy. And the administration that we were fighting against, the Bloomberg administration, was completely uninterested in. They were just not a negotiating partner in any way. They didn't see anything they were doing wrong. They had a lot of very racial rhetoric about why stop and frisk is necessary and how it prevents crime. And we had enormous buy-in from the community groups we worked with and who had been struggling without litigation against this policy. So one of the ways that we as litigators try to sort of honor that is right now to include them as stakeholders in the remedial process, try to do some fixing of the policing system, but also in the trial itself. Corey spoke about, the dehumanization that is maybe the central part of policing. I mean, it's sort of almost the goal of this kind of policing. We had numerous plaintiffs and witnesses on the witness stand who told extremely compelling stories of what had happened to them. And I think it was the first time a lot of New Yorkers heard the sort of daily, multiple experiences of harassment and how painful that was. We're now in a period of time where there's a little bit more attention to when police murder people in the streets, especially black people. But in stop and frisk, for the most part, people weren't getting murdered through stop and frisk. They were just being dehumanized and harassed and made to feel like criminals for literally going to the store to buy milk for their younger brother, which was, one of the witness accounts that we had. And so I think we try, even though it's you have a limited ability to do that as litigators, to not just involve community groups, but also to make the individual stories heard as much as possible through our litigation. And in immigrants' rights litigation, we almost exclusively work with community groups who are suing the federal government for sometimes for information about detention practices or policing practices, but also sometimes to fight constitutional violations in immigration policing, like warrantless raids of homes, where with widespread racial profiling, community arrests where somebody is walking down the street, looks Latino, and gets stopped by immigration and picked up. So we almost always try to work with a community group who can not just help us build the trust with our clients, but also use communications and community organizing to amplify what the litigation is doing.
So you asked two questions, first about coalition building and about the impact of the new administration. I'll go into the second question first. So as I said, I work in Cleveland under a federal consent decree. And before the Obama administration, that was rarely used as a way to rectify any policing practices, but it was heavily expanded in the past 3 years. There's one in Ferguson, and then New Orleans, and then Newark and New Jersey. And right around November, Baltimore and Chicago were just about to have consent decrees. In Baltimore, I'm not exactly sure where they stand. I think they had the decree entered into court. And once it's in court, you're good to go, because at that point, it's an agreement. So I liken it to your insurance company owing you money for something. Once, it's already been agreed that they owe you X amount of dollars, a new leadership doesn't change that they owe you that money. It might make it harder. You might have to call more to get your money, but like they still owe you. But if it hasn't been entered yet, that's when things get tricky. So Chicago, they had investigated and found clear problems, but they hadn't entered the agreement yet, and it's probably not going to be entered, but there's some stuff going on. So I'm in Cleveland, and it's entered, so the judge is committed to overseeing the reform, so it's going to happen, but there won't be any more federal decrees, most likely, under the new administration. And I think it's very debatable if this is a way to actually have change and if it works, but just from my legals, my like studying law, unfortunately, we've never actually had any progress in civil rights without some kind of clear federal intervention. Going back to the Emancipation Proclamation, we had to have, Lincoln. It wasn't perfect. None of it's ever perfect, and sometimes there's bigger problems created. But you can't count on states to do the work themselves, unfortunately, because you'll have some states doing great works, and then you'll have other places who really don't care. And then continuing to Brown v. Board, we had to have the National Guard go in to integrate schools, also not perfect, and the Civil Rights Act, similarly not perfect, but I think you really need some kind of federal push. And so we're not going to have this federal push in the policing space for a while, at least. And from what, like I said, we're working.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. Like I said, we're working with different departments in different ways. Sometimes the police chief asks us to come in, like I'm doing with the consent decree. Sometimes community groups ask us to come in. In those spaces where it's the police chief or the community groups, those places are going to hopefully progress to some extent. They want to see change happen. And granted, they might not have a full understanding of what change they want to see happen because, it needs to be a radical transformation, and they're probably just trying to solve some small crimes, but they're going to progress, and they're going to move closer towards building some kind of trust or healing some community spaces, whereas the localities and the cities that don't care are just going to just get even worse. So I think the disparity is going to grow even further. I didn't mention this, but there are 18,000 police departments who all have different rules. There's no federal standard even. So with that, these 18,000 groups without any, true oversight from the federal government, who knows what's going to happen. So that's what's on the Trump administration. And then with coalition building, so the consent decree in Cleveland calls for community engagement around every single policy, and they want as many groups as possible giving their voice. But one thing that we're having a really hard time finding is, who is the community? What is the community voice? And especially when you look at community groups within communities that Corey spoke of and Ghita spoke of, the victim testimonies, if you have a deep-seated distrust for police officers and the system, do you even want to come out and discuss? Do you want to even tell your story? The people who told their stories, that's really powerful. But for some people, they don't care to share that with anyone, and it's not. They shouldn't have to if they don't want to. So it's challenging finding, the different coalitions you want to work with and the different groups that you want to engage with. The frequent flyers, those who come out constantly, they are important, but they have one perspective, and they don't speak for any community. And additionally, like as we saw from even the most recent election where, did half our country come out to vote? People are busy. People don't have the time to come out. If you're busy living your life and, facing over-policing issues on a constant day-to-day basis, you might not come to a community meeting in the evening after working 2 jobs to talk about policing. So one thing at the policing project that we're trying to do is figure out, who should speak, who can speak for certain voices, how do we give groups a voice who might not come out. So a lot of what we're doing is finding ways to go to where people are versus having them come to us. Going to, in Cleveland, they have block club meetings, going to block club meetings and distributing surveys there. Corey spoke about language in a different way, but, even when you create an online questionnaire, creating language that everybody could understand, not just with education level, but so you don't exclude others from wanting to engage in that topic. Even the word crime. We recently put out a survey in Cleveland around community empowerment oriented policing, and one of the questions was, if you had, there's a bit as in most over police, or in most cities, there's vacant homes issues. So when there's a vacant home, it's a place for things to occur that you might not want to see, from drugs to just hanging out to squatting, and there are different levels of if those things should be occurring and in what spaces. But oftentimes it makes people feel unsafe, and you might not be able to walk past that house. So we asked a question about, if there was a vacant home in your community and you saw something that, raised your eyebrows, how would you want that problem solved? And I think we used the term, if you saw young people hanging out after dark. And even that was just not the right way to ask that question, but we had already gone through all the different ways, so people didn't think to jump to, oh, it's Black people hanging out there. Oh, it's people doing drugs. Oh, it's people doing we didn't want people to jump to conclusions and to already box that problem into a certain kind of issue. So to language, finding do's and don'ts, creating material so that the language is accessible and inviting to as many groups as possible is important. And another do is going to where people are versus having them come to you to to provide your input. And then also, everyone's trying to figure it out, but finding all the different ways to solicit community input. So we're doing things, like I said, online questionnaires, text messages. You can't call landlines anymore, so that's not a way to get community input. Working with groups, we don't work with a group like H.O.L.L.A, but working with groups like H.O.L.L.A who already have connections to people who might not want to come out, and having them, reach out to their groups to get input. And what we found in Cleveland, that it's also hard, because if I'm talking to somebody like Corey, and Corey has some people who might have some viewpoints, he might not want to bring them to me to talk about their problems. So having to form a relationship with Corey and other people like that who have connections with quote unquote at-risk youth, or whatever you want to use whatever term you want to use, to get their input. And so there's a lot of challenges, but we're figuring out how to do it.
Coalition building, I haven't done much coalition building from at least my intentional understanding that I was in a coalition. But from what I've seen and some of our experiences in coalition building, what I think is important just to think about is really being self-reflective. So really thinking about who you are, who the group is that you're a part of, how are y'all located historically, politically, socially, what is the issue, how are you related to that issue. I think anytime you think about an issue, anytime you think about social justice, it starts with you. And really that's the work first. And I say that because if we don't do that work before we come to the work, there's a big chance that we're going to cause harm. And even when we do that work, we still cause harm. So I'll start off with self-reflection. I will also say that coalitions, you have people who come from various different missions, political agendas, and sometimes you form around the issue, but everything else about you may not be the same. So I will also say it's about relationship building, kind of like what we all talk about at H.O.L.L.A in the Center for New Leadership. Our organizing philosophy is about deep relationship building, and not just meetings. Not let's meet from let's put on our calendar that we meet once a month, and we have our regular conference calls or Skype calls. It's about seeing people as humans in different modalities. So we have a conference call. We tell them come to the barbecue. We tell them come through here. Let's go. Let's kick it. Let's go to watch a basketball game. And you see their humanity in different iterations, and you build trust in different iterations. Because it's easy. Us as academics, us in school, it's really easy to perform for the test. We all do it. Got to write a paper. We wait till the last day. We get it done. We know the mechanisms of performing. So social justice is the same way. We can articulate. We can perform social justice. We can articulate points. But this is about deep human, transformation. So we have to see people in human moments outside of the points, in real moments. And what that does over time, it builds emotional and spiritual trust, particularly thinking about histories of distrust. If we're trying to cultivate humanization and we're trying to cultivate which is deeply around trust, then we got to have multiple modalities that help us learn how to trust each other and give us evidence to trust each other in different ways. And then, and the last thing I would say is about have integrity, and be critical and confident in whatever integrity you stand on, your group stand on, and find language and representations to bring that integrity into the space that you build in coalition with. I can talk about organizing work that we're doing in Bed-Stuy. If, for examples, if that's helpful. So I'm also an organizer with the Center for New Leadership on Urban Solutions. I think some of y'all are going to our office tomorrow. And we've been doing like work around the prison industrial complex, mass incarceration for the last 40 years, starting inside a prison. And all of our experiences and reflections and marches and political campaigns and think tanks over the years and those reflections that have been passed down. Like we done won policies and like closed down jails, but like 2 months later, like our young people are still getting locked up and we still feeling fucked up on the ground. So we know that even when we win policies, that shit don't really work for us deeply on the ground. And we done spent all our energy on chart paper, organizing, marching, and we shut down the block. We win the budget, but like our lives are still fucked up on a day-to-day. But the news line says policy won. So we understood that like, oh, we can win policy, but on the community level, things don't change. And on an individual level, transformation is still hard to happen. But on a system level, on some surface way, it looked like we winning. So the way we been bubbling and dealing with that, we really understand that for us, healing and justice happen on 3 levels. And we call it CSI, and it's really about community empowerment, system divestment or realignment, and individual transformation. And we believe that those things have to work simultaneously and integratively at the same time. And what that means for us to hold ourselves accountable, we created a pre-arrest diversion community empowerment project that we've been building for like the last 2.5 years. And the reason why we've been building this for the last 2.5 years, because we wasn't just excited to launch the diversion, we really wanted to have the relationship and the relationship power from the police department. So we then talked to the local precinct in the neighborhood, and we really organized it so that we are, like the diversion will be at our organization, and that they will be diverted directly to us, that they won't get fingerprinted, they won't go to prison, they will come straight to us. And that's because of our 40 years experience of doing this work, and that's us really self-reflecting and saying who we are in this conversation. Oh, this is about policing, it's about young people, it's about our neighborhoods. Oh, we've been doing this for like 1,000 years. We are experts in this. And then the work that we've been doing has been bubbling up. So we came to that coalition, came to that conversation with NYPD saying, this is our plan, and if y'all want to talk about community empowerment, this is what it looks like. And we had a commander who was open to engage in that conversation. And at the local level, we started there 2.5 years ago, building with a local precinct in the Bed-Stuy. But over those 2 years, we done took him to many places. You come to the hood, you come here, you come to this presentation, let's see you here. We done went up 1 PP. Susan, who's supposed to be here, we done built with Susan. We done talked to Susan 1,000 times. We done talked to 1 PP Plaza, and we done negotiated. We can go to 1 PP Plaza, and we be human in those real moments. You can have on all your badges. You can have all the police, and we're going to be human, and we're going to build. And you come to, so we've created relationships over two. And while we've been doing that with the police, we was doing that with the church in the neighborhood. We was doing it with the local businesses in the neighborhood. And now Rechna and the rest of the Hill and Justice youth organizers, we're about to launch like a youth-led thing where we're going to build with young people in the neighborhood about what this project is and what this community empowerment project means. So for us, it's not really about diverting young people away from this. It is about diverting young people from the system, but for us, it's about culture shift. And it's about transforming the culture. Like when police come into our space, it's not just that they diverting the young people. They in a new skin. They in a new place. They got to respond differently. They got to engage as a human differently. It's not just a drop off. It's a process. So that's what I would say also about coalitions. I think it's a process, and I think it's deeply about self-reflection, and it's hard. If you're gonna be real with it, most coalitions are like really hard. And if you're true, so that energy to go in a coalition, you got to really be humble because people coming from different places. And if you're really trying to go deep in the issue and you're really trying to go in it, then it's going to be it's going to be some debates. It's going to be some disagreements. So that's my thoughts on that.
So that dovetails into my last question very well, and then I'm going to open it up for the floor. But I spend a lot of my time imagining, writing about, talking about, and like projecting a world without prisons. What that looks like, what that feels like, how we do that, how we move toward that. So we've talked about this in a way. The picture you just painted, Corey, is a world without policing. So just real quickly, I wanted to throw that out to the panel. If anyone has thoughts on what does a safe world without policing look like that we can envision, work toward, and really radically reimagine.
I just think it looks like holla. It looks like black and brown people. It looks like the people who are most oppressed. Like really, 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 really like being uplifted, being seen, being visible. It means that all of us as individuals, no matter like if we black, brown, if we a woman, or if we white or do like we all got work to do. And like it means that like the way this system have hurt us, historically generations. Is that and our work is like our work is connected to other people's humanity. Like if you don't do work on your when I think about a work about prison, if you don't do the work on yourself, you are like slowing down our collective humanity. So that's what I think about a word about prison. I think about deep self-reflection. I think it's about really thinking about dope people who are always criminalized, and it's about like reshaping. It's about anything, it's about decolonization. I'm saying big words and little words, but what I'm trying to say is that it's easy and it's hard because we are so socialized and so programmed. We're so plugged in. We're in the matrix. We're plugged in. We're like our phones. We're like in it. So like when people say abolition, people don't see it. Like, what you mean? When people say like what you mean like grassroots shit? What you mean like you gonna go into the president office with your do-rag on? Like people don't get it. It means like I'm walking into the president office with my do-rag on. That's what like a word without prison means.
So word without policing, I think it first requires a national level acknowledgement of the history of policing and why it is what it is today. If you don't know, police didn't exist until slaves were free. Granted, that wasn't the only, like there was also urbanization and anonymity. It wasn't like a cause and effect exactly, but there were no, you had masters, I guess, that was the police. But police didn't exist until slaves were free. And then they were, throwing people in jail for not whatever crimes were, but nothing, literally nothing. So I think that has to be acknowledged. I think every officer should know that and understand the history of where they're coming from. And then I think we really need to, I work with police day in and day out. I really, being part of the policing project and working within a police department has changed my view on police. And I think they are sadly also victims of our horrible, oppressed society. I think the issue is health and education and housing and how we have redirected that. And officers who are making $30K a year, and that's supposed to be their career with the family, are, called for everything that our nation and our cities have neglected. We throw people in. Same with corrections. Yeah, exactly. We throw people who are the most at risk of already going to prison all in the same community, and then throw a bunch of cops there who don't even know anything about those people's backgrounds. So I think the police are policing many issues that they shouldn't be policing. One way that could be solved is changing the team of police officers. First of all, paying them more so they're professionals in what they do. Changing the team so when you have officers go out, have a social worker on there. Have a team of people that are interdisciplinary versus just one person. You could also train officers so they can do have a wide variety of skill sets. But I studied psychology in undergrad. I'm better to send to a homeless person than an officer who, had 2 months of base academy and basic training. And that's what we're actually doing. That's irresponsible and unfair. So I think it's, as we talk about, changing policing, I think we need to look at our city government and city politics, and instead of think about who we want to give money to and think about what we want to incentivize.
So there are many parts of our world that are communities without policing. When I did student discipline litigation, something like 10% of New York City schools did 50% of the suspensions and expulsions. That means that a huge chunk of schools were not treating normal student behavior, a bad day, a dispute, as a criminal action to, bring in security, police, ambulances, etc. Our white suburban communities that have statistically larger, higher rates of certain kinds of drug use are not overrun with policing. We have many, many communities in our country that are essentially not over-policed and resemble worlds without policing. And part of that is, as Corey, and Nonny have said, it's part of it is a cultural assumption. If you are living and doing your own private thing in your own private white suburban home, you do not expect the police to come in and separate your family because they found marijuana. I mean, that's just not an expectation, and almost because it's not an expectation, it just very rarely happens. It would be shocking if it happened. So I don't think it's that hard to imagine. We have many, many, many worlds that do exist without it. We even have, Irish immigrant communities with a very high rate of undocumented immigrants who don't encounter immigration all the time, who don't walk down the street as afraid as black and brown people who are fearful of immigration. So I don't think it's that far from our world, and part of it is, recognizing why we have the system that we do, as Nonny said. Part of it is, recognizing that policing currently exists to fill prisons, and prisons are an economic engine, both private and public, for many, impoverished communities, and that is something that we need to sort of start looking at. If you think about what's happening in Great Britain right now with, divesting themselves from the European Union, Western Europe was living not without borders, but with a very loose sense of borders where, crossing from France to Germany was not considered an illegal act the way we in the United States see any incursion from our southern border as, threatening our way of life. And so I think part of thinking about a world without policing is to think about what it really means to be in a global world and why we have the borders that we do and the security forces to enforce it.
Great. So we have about 20 minutes for questions from you wonderful people.
Yeah, that's a lot of good questions. The conversations are varied because we're talking to the local precinct, and then we're also talking to many stratifieds in the 1PP Plaza. And as humans, people show up different. So I just got I had a run-in with the police, and I got fucked over, and I had to go through the system just recently. And since we've been building relationships with the 79th precinct for this project that we was doing, we was able to check in on that relationship. So we checked in on them, and just to give you an example of how different relationships function different within the police system, and it's deep because speaking of what you were saying, that police officers are traumatized too. And one of the police officers, part of the work that we've been doing with police officers, we've been having deep healing circles. And we've been talking about what it means to be black in the police office, in the police department. what it means to be in like hyper white supremacy and like military structures where everybody's like, yes sir, yes sir, yes ma'am, yes, like all of that, and which is not about human, which is also about stopping humanists. And folks in those circles are talking about their own trauma and talking about when they're driving home and taking off their police uniform and they turn on their Caribbean music and they become a wife again, and they become a human again. And I say that to say that, like, yeah, it's hard to capture, like, what are the stories. We're pushing. We're telling them, like, don't come in our space with your guns on. They still come in with their guns on. We're saying, but if you really trying to talk about peace and human, like, you should never come in our space with your guns on. Like, y'all kill us all the time. Like, why would we ever think we're going to have a real conversation? Y'all coming in with your badge and guns on. They haven't took their badges off, their guns off, but this is the engagement we have. But they've been engaging with that. And they've been talking. So I think what I would say to your question is that, yeah, the police department and the police structure is so many dots in it. And it's so many functions. And it's so many yes ma'am and yes sirs, and so much hierarchy, that even the real conversations with real people on the ground, they have no power to move nothing. And the people who have power to move stuff, they don't talk to people like us. But we've been, so I think our longevity as organizers and doing this work for the last 50 years, that people just can't say no to us now. So, and we are savvy enough and confident enough to like push the conversation and be present with the conversation. So we're driving the conversation. So folks have no choice but to engage with it. Some of the engagements are leaning with us, but there's a lot of mechanisms and people are who even trying to lean. They're worrying about their own trauma too, their own safety, their own jobs. So people, individuals within the police structure, are also trying to negotiate the police structure. So yeah, like we are negotiating what potential offenses can be diverted. That's a nasty conversation. They like just people riding stuff on the bikes. That's it. So that comes, we're saying like, other things should be diverted, and we're giving reasons why other things should be diverted. And that's been a slow and long conversation. We've been talking about the pre-booking, because we don't want nobody to get fingerprinted, because fingerprinting have so much collateral consequences. And we've been breaking down the collateral consequences of being fingerprinted. Like me right now, I was like got locked up partly because like the rap sheets is wrong. They're saying that I'm a murderer on my rap sheet. So when the cops pull me over, like non-cops are looking at me because they see a murderer. Because the documents say this is a murderer. So they treat you like a murderer. This is the dehumanization. And then when I went to court, like if you listen to what they read about me, like it's all of the performance of dehumanization that is part of the that's part of the structure, that is part of the articulation, that is part of the makes it valid. Like these things make the criminal justice system valid too. So the last thing I would say about that is that it's a back and forth conversation, and we're having on the ground with some of the local officers. Those conversations have been really like transformational, but like those people have very little power in the main structure of 1PP Police Plaza. And those conversations are just starting, and I would assume those conversations are gonna be hard.
I like to connect the ideas between what Corey spoke about community healing, and then what Nomi said about the community and policing coming together to solve community problems. More often than not, police are coming to these communities to solve issues that are community issues, that are social issues. And they're often ill-equipped to handle these issues. And this idea of criminal justice, the system is obviously not working, and we need to move towards a different system, a system of restorative justice. And how do we move towards these steps? What steps do we take to move towards that better system?
Well, one thing that we're doing, one way you can do that, is to just talk to people and find out what they want to see in their idea of restorative justice. Even though you said that word, and that word means that phrase means a lot of things, it'd be unfair to walk into walk into a city and walk into all the different communities within a city and to project your view of what you think they want that restorative justice to look like. So I think it requires, finding a way to get key people in a room and to also go to where people are and talk to the people who are the most affected by the police and seeing how they want to interact with them and how they want their problems solved, and who they want to respond to. I mean, I think a lot of the issues that we found is that, I mean, I'm sure it happens in New York, but I just know about Cleveland because I'm there a lot. Officers are called for, a mom who is mad at her son yelling at her. And then the officer's there, and then maybe he sees something that he shouldn't have seen, and now something else is going on. So who should that parent call instead of an officer to solve that issue? And maybe it is an officer, maybe it's an officer and somebody else, but to link your idea of, it's mostly social problems actually, but then you don't want to get into what's been called broken windows policing, which is when officers are just taking low level offenses to very extreme levels to prevent bigger issues from happening. But then also, how do you solve these social problems? That goes to my point. I'm not really giving you an answer, but police are solving social problems, which is you're asking for things to go wrong. And I think the solution might be, asking people who they want, how they want their problem solved, and then forming teams of safety people. I wouldn't even say officers, but public servants to solve those problems. Maybe it's a teacher versus an officer. Yeah, a peacemaker, exactly. So that's my idea.
I just wanted to add to that. We haven't sort of touched on it explicitly, but disability is a huge component of what happens, the tragic circumstances that sometimes happen in bad police encounters. Disabled students are the disproportion of disabled students who are suspended or expelled from schools even higher than the racial disproportionality in schools. In policing, many of these tragic police killings have been of not just of people of color, but disabled people of color. There's a huge disproportion of how disability comes into play with the police. And I think a huge part of the social issue has to be not managed by police. We need to have, trauma counseling. We need to have real services for people with disabilities. We need to have, a better assessment of how gender plays into all these interactions where, police are trained from birth that, the way to be a man is to tote your gun around. And I think there's a lot of other kinds of cultural issues that we don't have the time to talk about in detail here, but that need to be part of the conversation. It's not just how can police act better, it's how can the rest of society provide the services, whether it's through, community assistance to that mother, or, through actual just professional assistance and help for people who need help. That needs to be the first step before you're calling in the guns.
Yeah, it's this radical notion called social services.
I'd also like to add, especially for people in crisis and many other people, calling an officer could make something far worse before the officer even does anything. Just his or her sheer appearance in a uniform could escalate the situation dramatically. So, that's something that an officer won't even know, unfortunately, until he or she arrives, and they probably won't even connect the dots that it was their presence that made it worse. They got to a situation, and now it's violent, and they must act but they do act in a certain way. And I think, talking to people and seeing how they want the response to be. Should it be an officer showing up not wearing a uniform because this person, has had so many unfortunate situations that it's just going to make it worse? Social services, all the different options. But I wanted to add that oftentimes an officer showing up in uniform, just the presence will make things worse.
Yeah, I can go. I'm good.
You good? All right.
Thank you, all of you, for coming today. I was wondering if maybe you all, and Corey specifically, could expand. You've talked some about the work that needs to be done of rehumanization and transformative justice, and the conversations that need to be had. Can you expand more maybe on what exactly those conversations and what that work entails specifically?
Oh, no? I could go.
Throw one more question out. And
That was talking about specifically how we do transformative work, right?
Yeah.
So I guess like my question, because I'm hearing like wisdom from both sides of the room, and I hear a lot about like personal stories and how personal stories have like impacted perspective. But what I'm really, so in these spaces with police where new policies, this is for anyone, in these spaces with police where these policies are these new solutions are trying to be developed or whatever, are personal stories really legitimized in the space? Because personal stories are the most, are for me, the like real evidence, like that's real. But are they real in these spaces? Or are you using something else?
To start with your question, I thought Russia was going to answer, but we've created a healing justice movement, and part of the movement is our youth organizing collective. We developed an outreach plan and a collection of healing experiences. And we've created an outreach plan to reach to, organizations, institutions, and just young people in general throughout the city. We already started this. And we created this, we call it the Healing Justice Experience. And it's 3 hours long. We start off with raps, with bars. We put people in a circle. And then we really open up with a survey and assessment talking about systematic oppression. And ask people to feel confident, and we go through why it's important for us to create a space where we can share our wisdom and our harm, and it be validated. So we give them an assessment, and then we have like a 3.5 hour experience starting in the circle where we introduce ourselves, we identify who we are, we land ourselves, we talk about what healing means to us, and then we get into more vulnerable conversations about who we are and what struggles we go through and how do we engage with relationships with our parents. And we use that as a means to like build emotional and spiritual trust with other young people as a first starting point for us to keep going deeper later on. So we've created like 6 versions of that. And actually, if there's any youth groups or connections to youth groups, we started in February, we going all the way to August. We're just giving out free healing justice experiences to young people of color throughout the city to build deeper relationships. And for us, that's an organizing praxis for resisting systematic oppression. For one, as Black people, we believe the way it dismantles us is about making us separated. And we have actively invested in building more relationships with other young people of color. And that's like, you don't really get the gist of it because we're not dancing and we're not giving you that energy. But it's about spiritual energy. Part of our healing center, like youth development praxis, and that Kiran and Rachna is a part of, like, it's an 18-month process. It's not really about what you do or how you facilitate. It's about how you facilitate. It's about the spiritual energy you bring into the room. And like words communicate some things, but energy and spirit communicate something else when you're in closeness. So our young leaders understand spiritual energy, so we are dope with talking about how to move to the next topic, but the energy that we bring into the room is also part of the magic.
I wanted to speak on your question. So are the personal stories legitimized in these spaces? I think it depends on who's telling them. If you're, that's obvious, but if as I reiterate stories people have told me, it hits you, but it'd be better if they were telling you the stories, but then also I'm better than maybe an officer telling you the story and, in their own colored perspective of what might have really happened. And it also depends on how, if someone else is telling the story, how much their experience is impacting how they're telling the story. So if you're going to be, I've heard officers, recount the Sandra Bland, and when they tell that story, it's different from how I would tell that story. And it's just about, human nature completely. So that's one point. And in Cleveland, we're working to find ways to incorporate community members into officer training to tell their stories. And one way we're doing this is they just started the initiative called a reverse ride-along. And so I don't know if you guys have ever been on a regular ride-along, but basically an officer lets you ride in the car with them, and you get to see how hard it is to be an officer, and it is hard, and you see things from their car and their perspective, and you see people like get scared when the car drives by. But then a reverse ride-along is when an officer rides with a community member in their own car, I believe, and the community member just, it happens inorganically. Like, imagine if you're riding with somebody, the things you end up saying if you're riding through your community, like, oh, there's my church, or like, that's the playground I used to always play on, and then maybe you'll tell a story about the playground. So that is one way to have stories told and have them legitimized, but I think they are really important, and they have a huge impact. Like I said, there's a huge part of this that falls on local politics, and I think those personal stories can affect mayors, can affect the people in 1PP who aren't really on the ground. Because I think a lot of officers, they have seen good and bad, and they know those stories are out there.
If I can just add to the storytelling piece, in a trial, there is a set way that you must tell the story, and it's really one of the things that you want to do in a trial is make sure the story is told in the way that the judge agrees with your version, the community who's reading about it agrees with the jury, and it may not match exactly how the storyteller on the witness stand experienced it. So, I think, people talking to their friends about what happened to them when immigration busted through the door without a warrant are going to speak about it differently than they're going to speak about it in trial. They may spend the entire time with their friend talking about how long their child screamed. And while that is also frequently useful in trial, there's just a lot more restrictions and structure that you have to place on a story in trial. And so I think that's something that's important to be aware of. But, we do a lot of Know Your Rights trainings, and we are actually starting a component where people in our past litigation are going to be doing some of the Know Your Rights trainings to immigrants who, if I come in as a white lawyer and I'm like, well, your Fourth Amendment right is, they can't come in without a warrant, and you ask them for the warrant and you say you want to slip it under the door, and they're like, it's just not going to happen that way. And I'm like, well, I know it isn't going to happen that way, but you should still sort of say it. If I have my former client who went through the same thing twice, and she says, even if it doesn't happen that way, you have to say those words, then the lawyers can, it's an incredibly powerful thing. And people hearing from others that they went through the same experience, that they lived through it, that they made many, many mistakes they wish they hadn't done during that experience or that encounter, but, it was still, fighting it was still worth it, that they felt horribly guilty after, that they couldn't stop the horrible things that happened. All those stories are really powerful to enable, people who are suffering these terrible policies to just get through the day. And that is just as important as, winning the case. It is an enormously powerful thing to have people telling stories about their own experiences to other members of the community as you're trying to figure out ways to make social change. And those small interactions, as Corey has been saying over and over, they're not small, they're really the biggest.
That's a powerful point to end on. I think we are out of time, but thank you, powerful.
Thank you all so much for being here and doing this for us. I know that some of you might have to leave quickly, but there are some of you, Corey, I know, who can stick around. And Corey, in fact, brought with him a few organizers, yes? You want to wait for the group? Okay, great.
I'm late, I'm sorry.
So they too are here and can chat with you and answer questions. But you have about a half an hour until we get started again at 3 o'clock. And we gave you an extra long break now so that you could take advantage to have some interaction one-on-one.